right, shalom everybody. Shalom everybody. Welcome to Beginning Hebrew. I am Mark Jacob, teaching the Hebrew class. You all know me. This class is a technical Hebrew class, okay? So, like Jim has a series on the Hebrew alphabet. If that were a college course, his would probably be called Hebrew Appreciation, okay? It's not a class on how to use Hebrew as a language, but how to appreciate it in more of a spiritual sense. Okay, this is a technical class. Yeah, come on in, grab some notes. But this would be Hebrew theory. Okay, this is learning how to read, write, pronounce Hebrew. All right, and this is the beginning class, so this is going to go through the alphabet and the vowels. If you're online, unfortunately, I do not have a way for you to contact me with questions just yet. I do have a full-time job besides this, and there's no way I can get to however many of you are watching, all those questions. But people here ask questions anytime. I do ask they be on topic. Off-topic questions you can ask me any other time. That's just fine. But if something's confusing you, it's probably confusing other people in the room and other people online, so by all means, ask away. Another thing I'd like to point out is this is a class that gives you knowledge and information, okay? And those are good things, but knowledge and information can be used to build people up, or they can be used to tear people down. And so I would encourage you to use this to edify people, to encourage people, and just for your own benefit, to better understand the scriptures and better understand your God. And I point this out because this is a problem that I had at one point. I remember one time as I was starting to learn Hebrew, I was in a discussion with my dad, and he pointed out, he was talking about a particular Hebrew word that meant barley. Okay, the word was se'or. And I told him that wasn't the word for barley, because I had just done a word study on the word for yeast, which is also pronounced se'or. I told him, no, that's not barley, it's yeast. And so I corrected my dad, and I wasn't very nice about it either. Turns out they're homonyms. Se'or means barley. Se'or spelled slightly differently means yeast. And so, I thought I was educated, but in fact I was ignorant. So please don't let this go to your head as it moves along. It will be very exciting. So keep the excitement, and just try to pass on that excitement to others, not judgment onto others. So, notes for the class. When you're here, every time you come in, I'll have them on that table, the notes for this week. If you're online, you can get a electronic copy, or if you're here, you can get an electronic copy at theregathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 1. I'm going to keep that up there so you can get it anytime you need it. This will give you a list of links. There's only one right now for the class that we're in. But anyway, you can link to that, and it's an electronic copy of all these notes. I do recommend getting them, and they pretty much have all the information you need. I'm going to cover a lot of material in this class, talk about a lot of things. Some things will be kind of tangential, but that's all just to help you remember the notes, okay? Or just for general interest, because it's kind of dry just learning the alphabet on its own. So, but anyway, so you won't have to write down anything except what's actually in those notes, but you can if something interests you, okay? The Hebrew I'm going to be teaching, there are actually several different versions of Hebrew. So we're going to be learning modern Hebrew in this class. And modern Hebrew is contrasted with ancient Hebrew or Paleo Hebrew. Okay? The main difference between modern Hebrew and ancient Hebrew is the appearance of the letters. Okay? So modern Hebrew employs what they call the Babylonian script. And ancient Hebrew or Paleo Hebrew uses pictographic letters. Now, in this class, I am going to touch on the Paleo letters and what they mean briefly. Like I say, this is not a spiritual application class, but it will help you to remember some things about the language. And it also, another interesting feature of Hebrew is that it is the predecessor to Greek and also the predecessor to English. And you can see that looking at the pictographs much easier than you can looking at the Babylonian script. The order of the letters in the alphabet and their appearance gives rise to the Greek alphabet's order and appearance. So I'm going to demonstrate that through the Paleo-Hebrew letters. But as I say, this is the script we're going to primarily be using, the Babylonian script, the modern script. If you find a copy of the scriptures in Hebrew today, it will be written in this script. This is the script you'll see Hebrew in pretty much universally, except for the cursive script, which is more informal. Babylonian script is also called the square script because the letters kind of all fill a block. But anyway, that's the primary difference between modern and ancient. Also, modern Hebrew employs vowel symbols or vowel markings. Hey, come on in. Yeah, grab some notes from on the table there, beginning Hebrew notes. The Hebrew alphabet is composed of 22 letters, and all of those letters are today considered to be consonants. So they'll make consonantal sounds. Vowel sounds in ancient were not explicitly written. You just kind of had to know which vowel sounds to fill in at which points. Modern Hebrew employs vowel markings so that you know where the vowels go and which vowels they are. So I'm going to be teaching the vowel markings. It's much easier to learn the language that way. Very grateful to the Masoretes for developing that. Masoretes are a group of scribes that developed the vowel markings and also are responsible for the Masoretic text, which is where many of our Bible translations come from. Let's see. Modern Hebrew also has final letters, whereas ancient developed final letters over time. Now, the reason I'm using modern, again, is so that you can read modern Hebrew. Most things you find today are not written in Paleo-Hebrew. Some of the Dead Sea Scrolls are. So it's cool to know, because then you can look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and actually read them. But modern Hebrew is also, of course, what's used in modern Israel. So I think it's going to be the most useful for you at this point, and you can always transition to ancient very easily once you know the modern. Okay? All right. Now, even in modern Hebrew, there are variants. There are different dialects. Okay, a dialect is how a language is spoken. All languages have dialects, and usually dialectical differences arise from geography. So, for example, the English language has different dialects. Now, I don't know if they have any technical names, but we all know that somebody from North Carolina, okay, speaks differently than somebody from Minnesota, okay, speaks differently from somebody in New Jersey, all right? But they're all speaking English, okay? All English, different dialects, and it's based on geography, okay? And so ancient Hebrew and modern Hebrew are no different. They had dialects. In fact, dialects in ancient Hebrew go way back. In Judges 12, verses 4 through 6, there's an excellent example of a dialectical difference between two groups in ancient Israel. Kind of give some background here. This is describing a period in Israel in which there was a civil war between the Ephraimite tribe and the rest of Israel. And so, anyway, starting in verse 5, Judges 12, verse 5, it says, "The Gileadites held the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any fugitive from Ephraim said, 'Let me cross,' the men of Gilead would ask him, 'Are you an Ephraimite?' If he said no, they would say to him, 'Then say Shibboleth.' But he would say Sibboleth, not being able to pronounce it correctly. Thereupon they would seize him and slay him by the fords of the Jordan." So they used the dialectical difference that the Ephraimites had. the Ephraimites did not pronounce the SH sound. Okay? And that's actually due to the pronunciation of this letter right here, the sheen. Okay? In modern Hebrew, you can make two different sounds, depending on whether there's a dot above the left side or a dot above the right side. Above the right side makes a sh sound, and above the left side makes a s sound, an S. So S, SH. Okay, the Ephraimites, either the Ephraimites had lost the SH sound or the rest of the tribes had developed an SH sound. Okay? But in either case, there was a dialectical difference even back then. Okay? So anyway, today we just kind of have to pick a form of pronunciation to use. And so the form that I'm going to use is called the Sephardic dialect. All right. The Sephardic dialect is what is preferred in modern Israel. It was developed after the diaspora. It's the dialect that was developed by Jews in Spain. The reason I'm teaching it is because it's the dialect of modern Israel. Okay? There are two other dialects of note. There are more dialects than that, but there are two others of note that I'm going to point out when there are differences between them. One is called the Ashkenazic dialect. Okay, this was developed by Jews in Germany, and a lot of Orthodox like to use the Ashkenazic dialect. And then another dialect is called Yemenite. And this dialect was developed by Jews living in Yemen. Okay, a lot of scholars believe Yemenite dialect to be closer to the ancient dialects than Sephardic or Ashkenazic. Okay, and there are a lot of interesting differences between Yemenite and the other two. So as we come across those differences in the pronunciation of letters and vowels, I will point them out. But this is the one that we're officially going to be learning, is the Sephardic. Okay. Any questions about dialect pronunciation, modern versus ancient, anything of that nature? All right. Okay. Well, a couple other things before we get into the meat of things. Hebrew is written and read right to left. Okay? So if you read Hebrew, you start on the right side and you read over to the left side, and the words are written right to left. Okay? That's very important because it's obviously the opposite of what we do in English. And that throws people for a loop sometimes when they're first learning. Also, just a side note, I'm not left-handed, but people who are left-handed find it easier to write Hebrew because they don't smudge the letters as they're writing. Just a little bit of trivia there. Hebrew, the Hebrew that I'm teaching has no punctuation. Okay, modern Hebrew does employ punctuation. Like in a Hebrew newspaper, you will find punctuation marks. But ancient Hebrew does not. If you open up a Torah scroll, a Tanakh, you will not find punctuation in it. You won't find periods, won't find commas, won't find quotation marks, which makes some verses a little interesting to translate. So yes, in Hebrew, no punctuation. There are also no capital letters. Okay, all the letters are of one form. They're not capital and lowercase. So names are not indicated by a capital letter at the beginning, nor is the beginning of a sentence indicated that way. Okay, and last of all, I mentioned the notes before that you've got in front of you and that you can get at this address, theregathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 1. Those notes are pretty much everything you need to know, and everything that I'm saying is stuff that you may want to know. Okay? So yes, rely on the notes. If I've left something important out of the notes, let me know, and I will fill that in for everybody. Okay? Okay, so any other questions about Hebrew in general before I get started? All right. Well, we'll start at the beginning. The first Hebrew letter is Aleph. And hey, Dave, could you let me know when it's like 10 to 3? Okay, thanks. Aleph is the first Hebrew letter. Aleph is an awkward letter to start on because it doesn't make a sound. The Aleph itself is silent. Now, you may wonder why there is a letter that makes no sound. Of course, in English, we have letters that are sometimes silent and sometimes not. Okay, the GH in night. Hebrew, at least, is consistent. The Aleph is always silent. But what's the function of such a letter? Well, as I mentioned before, Hebrew indicates vowels by little vowel signs that are not actually letters. So if you see a word that begins with an aleph, you know that that word begins with a vowel sound, since they don't have a letter for each vowel sound. In the middle of a word, an aleph will usually indicate a pause. Okay, and at the end of a word, it indicates a vowel sound at the end of a word. Okay, so aleph generally stands for a vowel, although you can have vowels all over the place. Aleph is silent. Every Hebrew letter also has a numerical value. Numerical value of aleph, being the first letter, is 1. In Paleo-Hebrew, aleph looks something like this. And this is depicting the head of an ox. Okay, it's sideways. You can see the mouth down here, the horns here, and the ears over here. Depicting the head of an ox. It represents strength or a leader. Turn it on its side, and all of a sudden, we're transitioning into the Greek alpha, okay, which became the Latin A. The alpha doesn't have these little points off the side. It looks just like a Latin A. So that is the aleph. Our second letter is the bait. Okay. All right, bait can make two different sounds. Many times you will find a dot right in the center of a Hebrew letter. Okay? That dot is called a dagesh. In some Hebrew letters, it will change the way the letter is pronounced. So in the case of bait, if it has a dagesh, it is pronounced as we would pronounce the English letter B, ba, as in boy. If it does not have a dagesh, it'll be pronounced as a V. Okay? So with a dagesh is B, without a dagesh is V. Okay? The numerical value of bait is 2. Right? In ancient Hebrew, bait looks something like this. It depicts a tent or a house. And the Hebrew word bayit, which you'll find sometimes pronounced bait, means a house. Bait became the Greek beta. It's a little difficult to see how it became a beta. And the English B. Okay? So that's aleph and bait. First two letters. Okay, now with those two letters, we can actually start making a word. Okay. So I'm going to talk about vowels for a little bit. In Hebrew, vowels are typically written underneath the consonant whose sound it follows. So, if we encounter an aleph with a vowel sign underneath it, we will pronounce the sound of the aleph first, and then the sound of the vowel. Okay, in this case, aleph is silent, so it makes no sound. This vowel sign, this sort of T-looking thing, okay, is called a kametz. Kametz. And the sound it makes is the sound of short A. Ah. Okay, the ah as in father or wall. Okay. So if we encounter an aleph with a kametz underneath it, we pronounce this as ah. Okay. If we encountered a beit with a dagesh and a kametz underneath it, we would pronounce the beit first, B, okay, ba, and then the ah of the kametz, so ba. All right. If we wanted to spell the name Bob, okay, beit, kametz, beit, Bob, right? B first, then kametz, then the next letter. And that's how you'll pronounce Hebrew words. Pronounce the consonant, jump to the vowel, consonant, vowel, and so on. Okay? Okay, now Bob is not a Hebrew word. Although I'm sure there are probably Jews named Bob. It's okay, Mark is not a Hebrew word either. But a Hebrew word is spelled aleph with a kametz, followed by a beit with no dagesh. Okay? So to pronounce this, aleph makes no sound, kametz makes an ah, beit with no dagesh makes a v. Av. Okay, Av. And Av means father. How fitting for the first two letters of the alphabet to spell father. All right, so there's your first word. Aleph beit. Okay. What time do we got? I probably flew through that. 2:23. Wow. Yeah, I did fly through that. All right. Well, we'll skip ahead. I don't have the resources for this next thing posted online, nor do I have them here, but I'll get them all to you. And it's no more complicated than what we've already done. So I didn't know how long it would take to go through all the material. So we'll move on to our third letter. Okay? Okay, our third letter looks something like this. Oh, backing up just a moment to the beit. An unfortunate feature of the modern script is that a lot of the letters look like other letters with some subtle differences. So you do want to pay attention to some of these subtle differences. In the case of the beit, it's very important to note this little tail that comes off the bottom right side. Okay? The reason that's important is because there's another letter that looks like this. Okay? Another letter that lacks that tail. And and that letter is not a bait. So now I'm going to exaggerate these tails when I write things, so there shouldn't be any confusion in my script. But if you read certain fonts in Hebrew, they can be very, very similar, and you might have to squint to figure out which letter you're looking at. In general, they will, in letters where they have the differences having a tail and not having a tail, the ones without a tail will kind of round that edge to kind of, give you a clue that, that there's not supposed to be a little tail there. But in the meantime, you may run into that. And so, come on in. So if you do run into that issue, just notice the tails, okay? Bait is...
Because I've been running into that with some of the letters, and I'm just totally thrown off.
Yeah, it does throw you for a loop. In fact, it threw some ancient scribes for a loop too. So, believe it or not, there's actually there's a genealogy. Someone pointed this out to me a few weeks ago. There's a genealogy that's listed in Genesis, and the same genealogy is listed again in 1 Chronicles. And you'll notice that one of the names in that genealogy is spelled one way in Genesis and it's spelled a different way in Chronicles. And the reason that is because it's the difference between two of these letters. So, whatever scribe was copying it down, the tail was smudged off or it was smudged on, something happened where they confused those two letters with another, and so, it's that can happen. It can happen to the experts. So yes, do take note of that little tail. Okay. Okay, so our third letter is Gimel. Gimel makes the sound of a hard G, G as in girl. Okay. Numerical value of Gimel is 3. Yes, G. Gimel is another one you want to take note of the tail in the bottom right. The way I'm writing it is very exaggerated, okay, but it can be confused with a nun, which looks like this. Okay. And I write it this way so that there's no way to mix them up. But again, there are Hebrew fonts in which they look fairly similar. So you do have to keep an eye out for that little tail. Okay. In Paleo Hebrew, Gimel looks like this. And it is depicting a camel's hump. Okay. The Hebrew word for camel is gamal, and thus the name of the letter Gimel. The Gimel became the Greek gamma, third letter of the Greek alphabet, and the Latin C. Okay, so that's the Gimel. Fourth letter is Dalet. Yes. Dalet makes the sound of the letter D, as in door. Numerical value is 4. And again, note the tail in the top right. Dalet is the letter that is most often confused with another letter. Okay? The Dalet is very, very, very frequently confused with the Resh, and you can see why. And if you look at certain fonts, you can really see why. Because sometimes they stick that little tail about that long in the font, and it makes it, especially if it's small print, it makes it real rough sometimes. So Dalet will be confused with other letters more often than any other letter, the Dalet and the Resh. So you do want to note that tail in the top right. Don't worry, all the letters are not like this. Some of them you can't possibly mistake for another letter. But these first few, there are a lot of similar looking letters later on. In Paleo-Hebrew, the Dalet looks like this, and it's depicting a tent flap or a door. And the Hebrew word delet means a door. This became the Greek delta. Doesn't take much imagination to see that one. And the Latin D. Okay? Now, with these two letters, we can form another word. So, we have a Dalet followed by a Gimel, and we put our Kametz vowel underneath the Dalet. Also, in this word, the Dalet will take a patach, but a dagish. Take a dagish, but it does not change the pronunciation of the Dalet. Okay? The bait, it'll change the pronunciation. So far, none of the other letters will it change the pronunciation, but you will sometimes find it in there. The reason that a dagish is put in a letter is a subject for intermediate Hebrew. Okay? It does serve a function even if it doesn't change the pronunciation of the letter. But I'm going to point out there are several letters in which it does change the pronunciation. So I will point those out. Don't worry about it finding dots in other letters. Okay? But anyway, so a Dalet with a Kametz followed by a Gimel. So we pronounce the D of the Dalet, the A of the Kametz, and finally the G of the Gimel. So this is pronounced dog. Dog. Okay? It's not a dog. Dog is, in fact, a fish. A fish. Okay? So, there are two words. Av, which is father, and dog, which is fish. I only throw in dog because that's all the words we can make at this point with just these letters. So, Av, I have a strategy behind dog. It's just so you have twice the vocabulary that you did before. So, dog is a word you will encounter frequently in the scriptures, though, because the scriptures do mention fish a number of times, and so you will recognize it as you read through. Okay, are there any questions about the Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, or Kametz? No? All right. Okay, well, as I said, I don't have the notes for those last two letters printed up, but they will be provided. I don't want to jump too far ahead because I want this to be something where people can jump in any time and don't feel like they're too far behind to catch up. So we'll pick up with the hay next time. Any off-topic questions that anybody has about Hebrew?
comets and the patak, and how in the dialect that we're learning?
Yes. Okay. Yes, quite right. The comets vowel. Okay. Now, I've told you that it is pronounced ah as in father. And in fact, it is in Sephardic Hebrew. Okay. It is also pronounced ah in the Yemenite dialect, but in Ashkenazic, the comets can be pronounced as a short O, or almost, it's almost an AW sound, aw. Okay? That's in Ashkenazic. So Orthodox, you will hear this aw sound. Nazik. I do have a strange habit of leaving out central syllables in words. I was trying to write feminine one time, and it came out femine, and it was a little confusing. But anyway, but yes, in the Ashkenazic dialect, the comets will be pronounced differently. Okay, it's not a comets, it's a kolmets. Okay, it's a subtle difference, so you can understand how it changes from one to the other. Okay, but yes, you will hear this pronounced differently in the Ashkenazic dialect. Okay. Yeah, the patach I will cover at a future date because there's another vowel that makes the same sound. And any other questions about anything? Don't be shy.
Why do modern people who speak modern Hebrew pronounce Shabbat, and then the Orthodox will say Shabbos?
That's a good question. Again, that comes down to the difference between dialects. Okay, the tav, which is the last letter, okay, makes a T sound in Sephardic Hebrew all the time. However, in Ashkenazic, when the tav does not have a dagesh in it, it's pronounced as an S. So you'll hear Shabbat. We say Sabbath because, incidentally, in the Yemenite dialect, the tav makes a TH sound without the dagesh. Okay, so we've got T, TH, and S as all possible pronunciations of the tav. So we say Sabbath. Okay, Jews in Israel say Shabbat, and Orthodox Jews speaking Ashkenazic dialect will say Shabbos. Okay, so here are all three. None of them is correct or incorrect. They are different dialects. Okay, although it is thought that the Yemenite closely resembles the ancient, but as we saw, even the ancient had different dialects. So who knows how it was spoken originally? Just on a tangent off of that, the issue of how to pronounce God's name comes up pretty frequently when people are looking at Hebrew. And among some circles, it's a big deal, exactly how to pronounce his name, because they want to get the closest to the ancient dialect so that they're pronouncing it correctly. And, you know, there are different scholars who think it's pronounced different ways, and they have different reasons for thinking that. One point I would like to make on that topic is that there are these different dialects. And I'd also like to point out the scripture in Judges that indicates they pronounce things differently even in ancient Israel. So if somebody thinks they have the absolute right interpretation based on scholarship, I'm quite skeptical of that because we don't have any tape recordings from back then. Okay? Now, you know, if somebody had a dream or whatever in which it was pronounced a certain way, I'm not going to argue with that because I can't. But as far as scholarship goes, okay, in my opinion, you can't be dogmatic or certain about that on that topic. There's simply too much variation today. If it was, if we were living in the time of Abraham, they probably knew how his name was pronounced. And if we had a tape recording, from that time, a voice recording, it'd be real nice. Settle a lot of questions. And it would be a really durable tape too, but we don't even have scrolls dating back to that time. So anyway, but just on a tangent, there are these different dialects, and in the ancient things changed over time too. All languages change over time, and so if you're learning this class to learn how to pronounce his name right, I'm not going to be much help in that. I can give you how the letters are pronounced in modern, how they're pronounced in the different dialects, and you can insert whatever vowel combination you think might work. But yes, and that goes for not just God's name, but for other Hebrew words too. God's name, of course, is the most highly contended because it's the most significant Hebrew word. But there are questions about other things sometimes too. And so just encourage you to study and be aware of the limitations of the information we have.
Are we going to go into that more in a future class?
The pronunciation of his name? I will bring it up once we've covered the letters that go into it. I'll point out this is how it's spelled. The vowel symbols are actually, some scholars would contend that they are known, but in general they're not. But yes, I will go into that a little bit because I wasn't expecting to fly through the actual material so fast, so we're probably going to have lots of time to talk about things off the cuff. So that'll be just fine with me. Any other questions?
Have you had an opportunity to read some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the ones that actually exist in Hebrew? My understanding is there's a very few that were actually in Hebrew rather in the Greek.
I have not. I've seen pictures of fragments of them, and some of those are neat because you can actually pick out. They're the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of them are written in the Paleo Hebrew. So it's kind of neat to look at that and see, oh, okay, that's where this comes from. This isn't just some idea. They have inscriptions. But no, I haven't had a chance to actually look through them. I have a book that has an English translation of a lot of them, a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls that weren't part of the canon, because there were the sect that lived up in the Qumran caves had a lot of writings. Very studious people. And so, they've got some extra biblical books and just records of various things, and Dead Sea Scrolls was an amazing find. But no, I have not had a chance to actually look at, the full Hebrew text of them.
It's 2:45.
No, okay. Okay. Let's see, anything else I should point out? No, not really. Again, this is the website right here to get the notes in electronic form. Okay. You do have to have a Regathering account to access these. It's pretty simple. Go to Regathering, click Make an Account, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, once you do have that, thegathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 1 is the notes for the beginner class. So feel free to use those.